Welcome to Madlik. My name is Jeffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. We also host a clubhouse every Thursday evening at 8 Eastern, which we record and post as the Madlik podcast. If you like what you hear, give us a star or two, share with your friends, and write a review. Today, along with Rabbi Adam Mintz, we climb up and down Jacob's ladder and explore the evolution of the Hebrew word for place, MAKOM. MAKOM signifies both a unique place in Jewish history and geography and a place that transcends both place and time. So find yourself a comfortable spot, but don't get too comfortable as we explore HaMakom, place, no place. Well, welcome. I am broadcasting from Tel Aviv, and Rabbi Adam Mintz is in New York, so we are in two different places. And we have a wonderful portion today. It's called Vayetzei, and it is about a famous story of Jacob, on his way to find himself a bride, and the sun sets, and he finds himself in a certain spot. He puts a bunch of rocks under his head as a pillow and falls asleep and has a dream of a ladder going from the ground up to heaven. And there are angels going up and angels going down. And when he wakes up, he realizes that he is in a very special place. And we are going to focus not so much on that story, because I just told you the story, and now you remember it from Hebrew school. But we are going to focus today on a word that is used multiple times, and I have used it already a few times today, and it is the word for place. It is MAKOM. So now I'm going to read a little bit of the text in the actual language it's written in, and we are going to focus on how this word is used here, and then how the history of that word developed over time. So we are in Genesis 28, and it says of Jacob, he came upon a certain place and stopped there for the night, for the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of that place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. That was one verse, and it said MAKOM 3 different times. And then it talks about the story that I just described, and towards the end it says, Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is present in this place, and I did not know it. Shaken, he said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the abode of God, and that is the gateway to heaven. Early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head, set it up as a pillar, and poured oil on the top of it. So, Rabbi, what do you make of this use of the word place over and over again? Is it just a special place? What is going on here?
Well, first of all, let me say that, that clearly is the key word in this story. It's not so much the dream, it's the fact that Jacob has found the place. Now, according to rabbinic tradition, to start backwards, this place is the place where Abraham was ready to sacrifice Isaac. It's this place that became the place where the temple was going to be built. So therefore, this is the place, the mountain in Jerusalem. This is the place. And Jacob locates the place. And I think that's a really interesting idea in Judaism, that there's significance to place. On one hand, we're told to believe that God is everywhere. Hasidic masters always say, where is God? Wherever you'll let him in. But in addition to that, there is the idea of God being in a specific place. There was the temple, and when the temple was destroyed, the temple was replaced by synagogues. And Jeffrey, you're in Israel. Actually, if you go north, and this week you were north in Israel, they have some amazing archaeological finds there of ancient synagogues There are synagogues that go back more than 2,000 years. So the idea of having a place in Judaism, and of course, it's funny, in COVID, people had synagogues outdoors. But in the Middle East, in the summer, they needed synagogues outdoors 2,000 years ago. So they kind of beat us to the punch. They had synagogues outdoors in Gamla and in many of these places. So the significance of place is extremely important, to find the place. There is a place where God is closer. There is a place where we can communicate with God. And I think, at least on the simplest level, that's what the Torah is telling us about Jacob. He found this place.
So you mentioned that the rabbinic interpretation is that the place is Moriah. It's where the binding of Isaac occurred. And Rashi, of course, because he always gives us an insight into what the traditional interpretation says exactly that. The interesting thing about that is, if you look at Genesis 22:4, it says, on the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place from afar, HaMakom mirachok. So that's kind of interesting, and some of the classical commentators pick up on that as well, that there's a sense, of course, with Yaakov of not knowing that he was in a very holy place, having the dream, waking up and realizing, my gosh, I am in a very holy place, and Abraham seeing the place from afar. As you mentioned, there is this connection between the place and a temple, a synagogue. If you notice at the last few lines that I read, what he does when he realizes that he's in a holy place is he takes a stone and he sets it up as a pillar and he pours oil on it. Later on in the Parsha, way later on, after Jacob has toiled for both Leah and Rachel, his two wives, and he leaves Laban, his father-in-law, in a hurry, after Laban chases him, they make a pact of friendship because there's a lot of tension there. And here, too, it's kind of interesting. They set up a stone very similar to what Yaakov did at the beginning of the portion when he finds out he's in a holy space. And here, too, they set it up, but they do something kind of interesting. The Yaakov calls it Gal Aid, which means the stone is a witness. And Laban uses one of the few times in the Bible where we get a kind of a translation. He calls it Yagar Saduta, which is Aramaic. And those of you who have studied archaeology know whenever they find one of these stones that has languages translated on it, it means that it's a way of understanding the past. So I think that if you look at it just from the perspective of a physical stone, a physical place, we have all of these dynamics going on. We have man seeing the holiness from afar and then maybe discovering it. We have man solving problems of tension between them and making a pact and consecrating. So it really, even if you look at it at the most, I would say, literal way, it's a fascinating insight into sanctification of a particular place. Wouldn't you say?
I would say there's no question about that. And again, the idea that you can sanctify a place, we still have that idea. There are certain rules that apply to synagogues that don't apply to other places. You have to treat synagogues with a certain amount of respect. Synagogues are sanctified.
Yeah, in a similar way. And then, of course, there's this concept of this stone here. So before we leave and go on a whirlwind tour of how this developed in rabbinics, I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about the significance to at least two religions of literally this stone. If you go to the Dome of the Rock, if you go to Har HaBayit, there is the cornerstone there, the Even HaShatia. We call it the foundation stone, and in Islam it's called the Noble Rock. And it's very likely that this is the story of exactly that stone. And of course, you have the beautiful Midrash, which explains why when Yaakov went to sleep, it says he put a number of stones under his head, and he woke up, and it says he took the single stone. So you have the stones fighting amongst themselves. Who will have the head of this righteous man on me? And they all come together. But this is the noble rock. This is the Even HaShatia, is it not?
It definitely is. So that stone becomes the holiest stone, the holiest place in Jewish history.
And there is another beautiful midrash that says that when the world was created and man was made from the earth, that in fact he was made from literally this earth. According to Rashi, it says he took the dust from that spot on which the holy temple with the altar of atonement was in later times to be built. An altar of earth thou shalt make for me. And Rashi draws the conclusion between the words earth used in making the altar and the words earth used in making humankind. So this is really the kind of the fulcrum, the eye of the universe for the biblical and rabbinic mind. It's pretty dramatic.
It most definitely, this story of the place is extremely dramatic. And you drew the parallel to the story of the binding of Isaac. And there also, Abraham sees the place. It's, the Torah, it's never by accident when the Torah uses the same word in different contexts. If the Torah uses the same word in different contexts, it's coming to tell you that you're supposed to connect the stories. So when you connect this story of Jacob's dream with the story of the binding of Isaac, this story is elevated. And actually, just to say another thing, that means that all three of our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all had an experience in the place. The place that would become the holiest place in Judaism is a place where the forefathers had their experience of relating to God. That's very powerful.
So if we were to stop right here, we would have enough to chew on, so to speak, in terms of taking these ancient stories and narratives of our forefathers and bringing them into the present in terms of the temple in ancient times and even today. But what amazes me is there's a phrase in the Talmud that is brought in the Bereshit Rabbah, and it's from right here. And it asks a question. And the premise of the question is, for those of you who are aware of Jewish tradition, the word place, MAKOM, in rabbinic law became a name for God. And of course, we know there are many names for God. You're not supposed to speak inside of a bathroom because you might say the word shalom. Shalom is a word for a name for God. In a sense, we believe that God has no name, and therefore there are many names. The colloquial, the common way of referring to God for religious Jews today is Hashem, which means the name. But Makom is used as a name of God. And we are going to visit all the times that it's used, or at least the famous times that it's used. But before we do, here is the amazing statement in Bereshit Rabbah 68. And it says, and he came upon this place, quoting from our Parsha. Rav Huna says in the name of Rabbi Ami, why do we substitute the name of the Holy Blessed One and use place? So he literally asks, why when we do the Seder do we say Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu? Why when we go to a shiva do we say HaMakom Yinachem, that instead of God should give you, console you, we say the place should give you consolation? And here's the answer that he gives. He says, because God is the place of the world, and the world is not the place of God. And for those of you who know Hebrew, you have to listen to the lyricism here. He says, Shehu makomo shel olam, ve'ein olamo mikomo. It's an amazing phrase. I'm going to say it one more time, that God is the place of the world, but the world is not God's place. And that is what Rav Huna says is the reason why we substitute the name of Makom for God's name. Are you as amazed by this phrase as I am, Rabbi?
Well, first of all, like you said, the poetry of the phrase is absolutely amazing. It's brilliant how they do that. But yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting idea. You might have thought that the world and God are one. That it's not that one is the place of the other, but the world is God and God is the world. But this phrase says that that actually is not true. That it's not true. That the world is not God's place, but God is the world. I mean, what is it? Let me ask you a different question, a Talmudic question. What's the difference between the two formulations? Meaning, what difference does it make if God is the world or the world is God?
Well, remember what it says. It says that God is the world, but the world is not God's place. Right. So it doesn't actually parallel the two. So I always think, of when Elie Wiesel was standing in front of Reagan, and Reagan was about to go to a cemetery.
This is not your place. Pittsburgh is not your place.
He said it is not your place. So I think in maybe the most broadest sense, what it's saying is that everything is God. In other words, everything that we can see with our senses is God. Every stone, every beam of light, every sound that we hear, but it's not God's place, meaning that doesn't limit God to that. He's more than that, but he is all of that. That's kind of the way I kind of take it at face value.
That's interesting. It doesn't limit God, but it gives God a kind of a foundation in the world. I like that.
And so the question is,
if God is not connected to the world, then how do we relate to God? God needs to be connected to the world somehow, right?
I think so, and that's why I think there's this sense of immanence and transcendence. In other words, it's kind of like Jacob wakes up in the morning and he goes, my God, excuse the pun, this is God's place. He hadn't seen it before. Or when Abraham sees the MAKOM from afar. I think there's that also, and of course that ties in a little bit to the latter, doesn't it? About being close. What you're going to talk about this Shabbat, about the heavens and the earth being both transcendent and immanent.
Right. I mean, that is a very important point. The relationship between heaven and earth. Now, interestingly, it's the world that's called Makom, not heaven. You get the impression that God's place or the place of God is the earth, not heaven. And that's something different than we usually are brought up to think. Right? Don't we usually think, Hashamayim, Shamayim Lashem? The heavens belong to God. V'ha'aretz natan livnei adam. But that's not the way they're saying it here exactly.
Yeah, and if you think of the future temple where God says, "V'shechanti b'tocham," that I will be within it, you have that aspect of it. What I'd love to do is, now that we have this kind of amazing sense of what MAKOM came to mean for the rabbis, to first of all agree, do we agree that in the biblical texts themselves there's not this sense at all? We started by talking about the holiness of this particular place, this stone, and the question then, if we agree on that, is what happened? Why did the rabbis, or how did the rabbis, and what license did the rabbis have to go to this so sophisticated, so lyrical, so poetic, maybe even a Buddhist sense, in sense it's like everything is here and nothing is here. How did this happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. Where, what was the development of the idea? Where did the development come from? Since it's not in the text, where does the development come from? That's really your question.
Yeah. So what I'd love to do is to kind of go over a few different kind of key phrases where this new sense of MAKOM as God's name appeared. And maybe we can together, and I invite anyone from the audience to come up. We are in virgin territory. No many years of learning gives you any prerogative here. It's really it's poetic. But the first time that we really see this in the biblical text is in Yechezkel, and we use this phrase in our prayers on Kedusha on Shabbat. So here's what Yechezkel says. Then he said to me, "Mortal, listen with your ears and receive in your mind all the words that I speak to you. Go to your people, the exiled community, and speak to them. Say to them, thus said the Lord our God, whether they listen or not. Then a spirit carried me away, and behind me I heard a great roaring sound. Blessed is the presence of the Lord in his place. Baruch kavod Hashem mimakomo." I don't know. I kind of, if this is the first time that you really get a sense of Mikomo being associated with God, it certainly does bring up exile. And maybe that's what this is all about. Maybe after the first physical sense of temple no longer had meaning, and the people were in exile, this became a new temple, and it was a temple in God himself. I don't know, but there is this association with exile in Yechezkel.
So let me tell you a very strong rabbinic tradition. The strong rabbinic tradition, there's a phrase in Hebrew that's called Imo Anochi B'Tzara, that when someone is suffering, we empathize with the suffering. And the amazing thing is that the rabbis say that phrase applies to God as well. That when Jews suffer, God empathizes with them. That when the Jews go into exile, God goes into exile with them. When the Jews are being punished, God is also being punished. And what they do is they reread several verses in the Torah to suggest that idea. Baruch kavod Hashem mimkomo, from God's place. Now, it's not God's place. It's every place. God is where he needs to be, or where God needs to be, not he or she. And that we somehow, and that God, when Jews are suffering, or when people are suffering, God is with them. When people are celebrating, God is with them. I think that's a very strong idea.
And part of that idea is that man is somehow involved here. So one of the alternative explanations of why God was there was b'makom shetzadikim omdim sham hakadosh baruch hu nimtza. That in the place where the righteous people are, that's where God is. And I think that kind of ties a little bit into what you were saying. It also ties into the famous answer of the Kotzker Rebbe when they say, "Where is God?" And he said, "Wherever we let him in." So you're saying he's everywhere, but nonetheless, it does relate to humanity in a sense, whether it's because they're righteous or because some other sanctification. Michael, welcome up to the Bima. How are you today?
Good, thank you. And it's late at night for you, and I really appreciate you being on this from Israel. I wanted to consider that there's a saying, I think it was Job, it's like his heart is as firm as stone, a heart of stone. I remember hearing that. And so when I think of what the rabbi said about everything is a perspective. So a heart of stone could be cold and hard and no empathy and just crushing, stepping on anything it passes. And then a heart of stone could be connected to earth energy, have permanence, stability, have endurance, strength, structure. So I just think that for me, I was listening of MAKOM, and for my understanding, MAKOM is this place that's everywhere, but I have been searching for it, and it's within. And I have tried it all. The heart of stone, no empathy, me, and then a stone that is connected to the earth and to everyone else and the sacred space. So I just think it's interesting. This heart of stone could be also seen in two different ways.
I think that's beautiful. You know, there is a sense of, as you were saying, that this place is available to everybody, is all-encompassing. This sense of having the stone, but having it accept everybody on different journeys, on different narratives, is one that I find very appealing. And if you think of how we use MAKOM in the Haggadah of this Passover Seder, we say, Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu, Baruch Shenatan Torah Le'amo Yisrael. We're saying how great is God that he gave us the Torah, and then it goes on, and it says, Keneged Arba Banim Dibra Torah, that God spoke to the four children, which is really just a symbol of four different, amongst a multiplex of different pathways that one could find to that stone. So I love that idea of having it being all-encompassing. And the other time that we use MAKOM is when someone is in mourning. And, you know, the advice that the rabbis give is don't say anything to somebody in mourning, whether it's Job or it's Joe from next door. Who are we to understand what they're suffering, what got them to where they are? So it says, HaMakom yinachem etchem, that the God or the place, this all-encompassing place, should accept you. So I do believe that there's a really strong sense in this attribute of God as a place that opens it up to so many different emotions and pathways.
Yeah, I mean, let's take a second and go back to the idea that in Shiva, when you offer consolation, you say, HaMakom, the place. Why do we think that is? Why do we refer to God as being HaMakom? Or is that actually what it means? Is HaMakom Yenachem Etchem, does it mean God? Or does it mean this place where you sit Shiva together with everybody else? Let that provide the comfort. Means, I think it's ambiguous what HaMakom refers to exactly.
Yeah, I agree. We do see here in HaMakom Yinachem this reference to the exile again. So that it is a recurring theme. It says that HaMakom should comfort you amongst the gates of the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. So again, you kind of get a sense of the evolution of this concept of a physical place to a more less tactile place, a more encompassing place. Yes, Elise.
I keep thinking of HaMakom as being like the state of mind, the state of being, the state of togetherness. Whatever the makom is, that's your makom.
Interesting. HaMakom Yinachem etchem means where you are now, that should comfort you. However you're feeling now, that should be a source of comfort.
Exactly.
The question, Elise, is how do you get that from the word HaMakom?
Think of the word situation. Situation is like makom.
Yeah, that's what you need to say. What you need to say is that it's the situation. May the situation console you.
Right.
That's a very nice. Jeffrey, what do you think of that? That's a nice little twist to this.
I think it's all there, and I think we would be remiss, and we are starting to run out of time, if we didn't mention the most famous heretic and I say that in quotes, of Judaic thought, and that is a guy named Baruch or Benedict Spinoza. And he was accused of something called panentheism, only because he said something to the effect of whatever is in God, and nothing can be or be conceived without God. He saw, in a sense, there was in the notes that I give for on Sephira for this talk, there is a erudite lecture that says that who could say that this idea of Spinoza was not in Judaism, and literally the first argument he gives is our sense of that God is the world, but the world is not God. And it's so transcendental and so universal and particular too. It's such a powerful idea. But one of the things that Spinoza was influenced by was Descartes, who literally said, if you can't, everything in the world is probably what's in your mind. Because, he said, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. And in a sense, Elise, that's what you're saying. This makom is in our head, but maybe Spinoza took it one step further, and he said the whole world is in God's mind. So this is a mind-blowing concept. There's no question about it.
I love this. I love this conversation. It was great.
So I just want to...
Thank you, Elise.
I want to conclude at least my comments by bringing ourselves back to Israel, which is where I am right now. And I was trekking in the Negev, and I came to a sign put up by the Nature Authority, and it's the type of sign that you'd expect to find on a campground. It says, put all your trash away, leave the site clean. But it's in Hebrew, and it says at the end, Ben Adam LeMakom, between man and earth and place. And of course, what it is doing is it's taking another time that makom is used in our tradition, which is before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We are told that for sins between man and God, between Adam v'makom, you can ask forgiveness on your own. Between Adam v'chavero, you have to request permission. But what this sign did is it took this concept that we're talking about right now, back to the physical piece of land. And in an environmental way, it says it's ben adam l'makom. It's between man and his responsibility to this beautiful world that we live in. And that really blew my mind.
That is a great way to end, Jeffrey. Thank you so much. Enjoy Israel. Enjoy the MAKOM. Everyone, we wish you a Shabbat Shalom. And we look forward next Thursday night to learning the Parsha of Vayishlach, continuing the stories of Jacob. And Jeffrey, Shabbat Shalom in Israel, Laila Tov. To everybody, have a great week. Be well, everybody. Bye-bye.
Shabbat Shalom to everyone, and let the place be with you.
Amen.